Hello students, welcome to EduStart English Teleteaching program. Today we are going to discuss part 3 and part 4 of the first topic of class 9, the priceless gift. We have already discussed part 1, part 2 and some paragraphs, a few paragraphs of part 3. Today we will complete part 3 and part 4. Before going to discuss the rest part of the remaining part of the text, let us have a recap what we have already discussed, what we discussed in the previous 2 sessions, previous 2 classes. Let us have a recap first, then we will go to the next part. So, I told you in the first session, I have divided the text into 7 SCPs, sense group paragraphs, right. For easy reading, for easy understanding, we have divided the text into 7 SCPs, sense group paragraphs, and we have already completed say SCP 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 5, right. So, SCP 1 you see the writer's first meeting with Maggie. Maggie is the poor girl and the time was Saturday, lunch hour, and the place where the writer met Maggie, the poor girl, in a restaurant and in the corner table where the girl was sitting, and curiosity, eagerness with the writer and also with the girl started to know about each other. So, this is the first part, this is SCP 1 of the first part, and in the SCP 2 we discussed the writer's second meeting with Maggie. The time was next Saturday after 7 days, and this time was lunch hour and the place was also the same restaurant, right. And Maggie told the writer about her family. The writer wanted to see her mother, that was the eagerness, that was the interest of the writer, right. And SCP 3 you see writer's first visit to Maggie's house. So, when Maggie wanted and the writer also wanted to visit Maggie's house to see her mother, the same Saturday, the second Saturday they went to their house, their home, and they started a conversation, and during the conversation they talked to each other, and at the time of talking they also reached their home. And SCP 4 writers information about India to Mistress Bethy. Mistress Bethy, you know, Maggie is the poor girl's mother and who was very old, was very sad, and his son was Frankie. He was very much worried about his son who came to India to serve in the province of the Punjab, right. And Maggie's mother inquired about India, the Punjab. She showed the photograph of Frankie and also the magic ring to the writer, right. So, let us go to SCP 6 part 3, right. You see, I am going to read out the text first, then we will discuss paragraph wise. It was almost time for me to return to India. I wished to go to say goodbye to Maggie and her mother, but the family was in mourning. Frankie had been killed in the fighting on the frontier. I calculated and found that Frankie had been dead some days when I told his mother he was alive and well. I felt ashamed to face Mistress Bethy, so I wrote a letter to them announcing my departure and bidding them goodbye. So, let us see some new words for you. You see, mourning, that is not mourning, mourning, right, and the meaning you see sadness due to somebody's death. So, the family was in mourning, was in very sad condition, right, because of Frankie's death, right. And the next word you see, there is a word which is ashamed. Ashamed means to feel, you see, to feel or shame for, right, to feel shame for she. So, I felt ashamed, right, and let us understand the text first, the paragraph. It was almost time for me to return to India. So, you know the writer was from India and he visited to England. During his stay, he came contact with this poor child Maggie, the poor girl Maggie and her mother, right. So, when it was time for the writer to return, he wanted to, he wanted to go to Maggie to say goodbye and her mother, right. But what happened? The family was in mourning, very sad condition due to the death of Frankie. Frankie had been killed in the fighting on the frontier. So, Frankie, you know, the mother Mistress Betty and the poor girl Maggie, they were very much worried about Frankie, and Frankie did not come, did not send any letter. That is why they were very much worried, but they came to know that Frankie had been killed in the fighting on the frontier, right. Frontier, you see, right. Sorry, departure, departure means you see leaving, right. So, frontier is a name of a province, that is right, and that is the frontier means the place where Maggie was serving and where he was fighting, and unfortunately Frankie had been killed, right. So, when I told his mother he was alive and well, I felt ashamed to face. So, the poet, so the writer felt ashamed. It was shame for him to go to Maggie and her mother, because he had told them a lie. Maggie was dead, but he said Maggie was alive, right. That was the problem with the writer, that is why he did not want to go, right. Let us go to the next part. The morning of my last day in London, you see the writer was staying in London, right. So, the morning of my last day in London dawned. I was to leave that night. As I was having my breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Maggie had come to say goodbye. She was wearing black. Are you leaving today? She asked. Yes, I replied. Today is the day of my departure. How long will it take to reach your country? In which part of the country do you live? She wanted to know. You see, let us go to some new words, dawn, and the meaning you see began or started. So, the morning of my last day in London dawned means started. It was the morning of his last day and I was to leave that night. So, the writer was to leave for India that night, right. He had to leave England, he had to leave London for India that night. And as the writer was having his breakfast, when, as here, when. So, when he was having his breakfast, there was a knock at the door and Maggie had come to say goodbye. You see, why Maggie came to see the writer. The writer did not go, but he wrote a letter that he is going to leave London. That is why Maggie wanted to say goodbye to the writer, right. And you see another word is knock here. Knock means beating, the knocking sound, beating sound. So, someone beat the door, at the door, and she was Maggie, right. So, Maggie had come to say goodbye. She was wearing a black dress. So, my dear students, you see, usually black is the symbol of black, white, these are the symbol of negative things, right. And in western countries, black means that is completely a negative thing, and that signifies the death of a person in the family. And that is why Maggie put on a black dress and came to the writer to say goodbye to him on the last day of his visit, right. She asked, yes, she was wearing black dress, and are you leaving today? She asked. The writer said, I replied, the writer said, replied, today is the last day of my departure and I am going to leave this place. How long will it take to reach your country? in which part. So, the girl wanted to know a lot of things from the writer, the distance from England to India and the place where the writer is going to, all these things the girl wanted to know, right. And you see the next part, I have entered the Punjab service. I shall not know exactly where I am posted until I arrive there. Is the frontier very far from here? Far from there? No, not very. Frankie is buried near the frontier. The girl's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. When I go to that part of the country, I shall visit brother's grave and your brother's grave and write to you, right. So, you see frontier, I have already told you, that is a province, a place just like a state, right. And so, I have entered the Punjab service. The writer answered, he had entered the Punjab service and he did not know exactly where he was posted, and the girl wanted to know, is the frontier very far from that place where the writer was appointed? No, not very. Frankie is buried near the frontier. So, Frankie, Maggie's brother, he died and his dead body was buried near the frontier, the province. And when the writer replied all these things, say about the place, the girl's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. And when I go to that part of the country, the writer gave him words that when he would return to the place, he would visit the brother's grave, and after visiting the brother's grave where he was buried, then the writer, he would write a letter to her, to Maggie, right. So, you see what we discussed, the main ideas in this part, you see. So, the main idea is time for the writer to return to India and Maggie's request. So, it was the time for the writer to return to India, and what was the request of Maggie to the writer, you see. So, writer wished to go to Maggie and her mother, but wrote a letter about his departure because he did not like, because he was ashamed of his own fault. He had told them a lie that Maggie, that Frankie was alive. This was the false news, and he told them only to make Maggie's mother well from the suffering, but it was actually just like a sin for the writer. That is why Mr. Gupta, that is why he did not like to go to Maggie's house. Maggie met the writer in the morning. After receiving the letter, Maggie went to the writer last day in the London, and there was a conversation between Maggie and writer, and Maggie informed him about the place, the frontier near which Frankie was buried, and Maggie's request also was that the writer should visit that place, and the writer gave her the words that he would visit that place, and after visiting that place he must write a letter to her, right. So, go to the comprehension part. We will discuss the comprehension questions, and so that you can understand the text better. It was time for Mr. Gupta to return to India. At first he wanted to go to Maggie's house to say goodbye, but why did he decide not to go? You just see. It was time for Mr. Gupta to return to India. It was the last day. He had a lot of interest to go to see Maggie and her mother, but he did not go. So, why did he decide not to go? You see, because he felt ashamed to face Mistress Betty as he had told a lie, right. So, next question. So, why did he feel ashamed to face Mr. Betty? Because you see, he told her that Frankie was alive. This was the false news. Frankie had already died, but to make Mistress Betty happy and to be well, that is why the writer Mr. Gupta told them a lie. This was for which he was ashamed of, right. Let us go to the next question. So, question number 3, you see, he did not go, but what did he do to inform them that he was returning to India? So, the writer wanted to go, but he did not go, right, because he was ashamed of his lie, telling lies, right. And the question is, he did not go, but what did he do to inform them that he was returning to India? And you see the answer. He wrote a letter about his departure. He wrote a letter to Maggie that he was going to leave London, right, when and how, right. So, let us see the next question, question number 4. What did Maggie do after receiving the letter? So, when Maggie received the letter, he came to say goodbye to the writer, right. And question number 5, when Maggie came to say goodbye to Mr. Gupta, what was he doing, right. And when Maggie came to say goodbye to Mr. Gupta, he was having his breakfast. The writer was taking his breakfast, right. Number 6, you see, where was Frankie buried? Frankie was buried near the frontier. We have already discussed near the frontier. He was not in the frontier. You are supposed to get one question, multiple choice type question, in the frontier, at the frontier, near the frontier, like this, and your answer must be near the frontier Frankie was buried. The most interesting and important part of the story, right, part 4, SCP-7, right. So, now you listen to me, I am going to read out the paragraph before going to see the new words for you. Maggie's face filled with gratitude. As she thanked me, her voice choked. She took a shilling out of her pocket, saying, "Please buy flowers with this when you go, and lay them on my brother's grave for me." In my emotion, I lowered my eyes. So, small paragraph, but some new words you can find: gratitude, gratefulness, right, the feeling of being grateful. आम जोटा को ओडिया रे कृतज्ञता कहूचे, जने गोटे काहू साहाय्य कले आम जेमति कहूचे, आई एम वेरी मच हैप्पी, आई एम ग्रेटफुल टू यू, राइट. So, Maggie became grateful to the writer, because the writer told her that he must go to the frontier and he will visit the grave of his brother and he will write a letter to her, right. The next word you see, choked. When she expressed her gratitude, her voice choked, stopped, you see, became unable to speak. She could not speak anything, right. And this is what the love and affection of a sister towards his brother, towards her brother, right. Shilling, shilling, that is British coin, and another word is lay. Lay means put. So, she took a shilling out of her pocket, saying, "Dear sir, please buy flowers with this, and when you will go to the frontier, you lay them, put these flowers on my brother's grave for me." In my emotion, I lowered my eyes. The writer lowered his eyes, right. So, my dear students, you see how the sister loved his brother. The brother is dead. He at the time of fighting, he was killed by the enemies and he was buried there. The family members, his old mother and sister, they did not see them, and she also, the brother did not write anything, and she and his dead body was buried there. How pathetic, how sad the story is, right. The child had earned the shilling with so much toil. I felt like returning it to her, explaining that in our country flowers grow in great profusion, but I consider, why should I deprive her of the joy the sacrifice would give her? She was foregoing so much for love of her brother. The joy of doing it was beyond all price. The grief in her heart would be eased a little. I picked up the shilling. So, toil, hard work. So, the writer thought that with hard work, the child, the girl, poor girl, had earned this money. Why should we take this money where the flowers are very cheap or available without any price? Profusion, you see, profusion, right. So, profusion means large quantity. So, flowers, they grow in great large quantity in India. That is why he did not like to receive that money, right. Why should I deprive? Deprive, you see, deprive means he did not want to make her unhappy जे वंचित करने से चाहून से दुख देवाक चाहून एक्चुअली तार जो आग्रह रही जो इंटरेस्ट रही जो स्नेह रही एक्चुअली दुख देवाक से चाहून राइट एंड the joy this sacrifice would give her, she was foregoing so much for love of her brother. The joy of doing it was beyond all price. So this joy was beyond all price, and the grief in her heart would be eased. Eased means that will be less, a little, that will be decreased. I picked up the shilling, so the writer received the shilling. Okay, children, in the next session we will discuss the rest part of the story, right? And we will also discuss some important questions. Thank you very much.